Shabbat Shalom. I just want to welcome everyone to the Sabbath Day conference call. And this is Barbara serving as your host today, and Mary is here as your co-host.
Yes, hello. So, glad you're all here and glad to be here.
And, okay, well, most of you know who Doug Batchelor is. If you're not from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Doug Batchelor is a worldwide and world-known teacher and preacher. He also is president of Amazing Facts, and he has a radio service of Bible Answers. His voice has been heard all over the world. So today our title is Doug Batchelor and the Lunar Calendar. So Doug Batchelor says, some say the calendar was changed. Well, there have been a couple of changes to the calendar, and here's an example of one change. When we went from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar in 1582, you'll notice what happened. They added 10 days to compensate for the seasons, and they also put in leap years. You went to October 1, 2, 3, 4 to October 15. And so did that change the calendar? Batchelor states, the weekly cycle has never been changed by the calendar. It went from Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sabbath, Saturday. The weekly cycle has never been changed by the calendar. And then he says, someone wrote a letter to the U.S. Naval Observatory, and they said, have there been any changes in the calendar through history that have affected the weekly cycle? And they wrote back and they said they don't know of any record of change to the calendar that has affected a continuity of the weekly cycle. Well, here is the letter that was wrote back. The U.S. Naval Observatory says, we have had occasion to investigate the results of the works of specialists in chronology, and we have never found one of them that has ever had the slightest doubt about the continuity of the weekly cycle since long before the Christian era. Well, when did the U.S. Naval Observatory come in effect? It wasn't established until 1830. So this is as far back as they could go. And here is, when did the Christian era begin? So the Naval Observatory has stated there's never been any change or any doubt about the continuity of the weekly cycle. Is that true or false? Well, the Julian calendar began in 46 to 45 BC, and Julius Caesar separated the months and weeks from the moon and made a continuous 8-day cycle. So their calendar was an 8-day week, and that would have been at the time of Yeshua. In AD 321, Constantine created the compromise calendar. He blended the Hebrew idea of 7-day week with the Julian concept of a continuous weekly cycle, and added the veneration of the sun god from Mithraism to create the Roman calendar used today. And then we have Pope Gregory XIII in 1582 created the Roman Gregorian calendar, and it was adopted by the whole world. Well, we did this video. I hope you go and watch it. A continuous weekly cycle is proven false. The weekly cycle has been interrupted and changed by many days, and the whole world didn't even adopt the Roman Gregorian calendar, and some even as recent as Saudi Arabia in 2016. And also, when this happened with Pope Gregory in 1582, a lot of the European Protestant countries would not accept the calendar because they thought it was a tie to the papacy and an attempt to protest the Protestant Reformation. But anyways, 12 days were lost, 11 days were lost, and you'll see they went from Wednesday to Thursday, so the cycle stayed the same each time. But an interesting fact is that England was a year behind Belgium, Spain, and Italy for 170 years. So that would be a big change in dates and years and times. Well, even the United States was affected because when England switched to the Gregorian calendar in September 2, 1752, they woke up September 14, and from September 2 to September 14, and well, Russia skipped a whole 13 days. But okay, most of those calendars did keep the weekly days in order, but Alaska had 2 Fridays in a row. So Alaska did change their weekly cycle in 1867. Also, Samoa changed their weekly cycle because they had 4th of July celebrated 2 days in a row in 1892. Well, you might be interested to know that the Constantine changed the Saturday, to the 7th day of the week. Saturday is only the 7th day of the week by the virtue of Emperor Constantine in 321 AD. He venerated the day of the sun, which moved Saturn Day from its coveted position as the first day of the week to the 7th day. So this is what it looked like here on the left. Saturn Day was day 1, Sunday was day 2. And so Sunday was moved to day 1, Saturn Day to day 7, so that there would be a 7th day week for the Jewish people to have a 7th day. So it's interesting that this was published by the Southern Publishing Association, which is an Adventist church publishing house. And so our own church, which I came from, knew that Saturday or Saturn Day was day 1 of the week, and it was changed to day 7 by Constantine. And we learned, of course, in church school and college and all since we were in grade school that Constantine changed the Sabbath in 321 AD to Sunday, the venerable day of the sun. But we did not learn that he also put Saturn Day as day 7. So he did change the order of the weekly cycle. Okay, Doug Batchelor says again, here it is, Mary.
When people challenge, we don't know what day Saturday and Sunday really are anymore because the calendar has changed. I think it's always interesting that they never have a problem with the calendar until they learn the Sabbath truth. Then they say the calendar was changed when we don't know.
Doug Batchelor says, and if you don't believe that, then you've got the evidence of 16 million Jews around the world. I could see that some of them might be shipwrecked on a deserted island and they lose track of the time. And you say you don't, or we don't remember what day is Saturday anymore. But for the whole nation to forget is very unlikely. And remember, Doug Batchelor is the president of Amazing Facts, and this is from an Amazing Facts article.
The Jewish people have been observing the 7th day from the time of Abraham, and they still keep it today. Here is a whole nation, millions of individuals, who have been counting off time meticulously, week after week, calendar or no calendar, for thousands of years. Could they have lost track? Impossible. The only way they could have lost a day would have been for the entire nation to have slept over an extra 24 hours and for no one ever to tell them about it afterwards.
Okay, well, Jews and the Sabbath, the forgotten fraud. We just did this video, so I hope you'll go and watch it. There's a lot of information here about the Sabbath. Here is a quote from the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, page 410. The new moon is still, and the Sabbath originally was dependent upon the lunar cycle. Well, Doug Batchelor says in this video, it didn't work that way for the Jews. They were on a lunar calendar. So he admitted they were on a lunar calendar. Have the Jews ever lost the Sabbath? Well, many people assume Saturday is the biblical Sabbath because the Jews worship on that day. It is claimed that Jews have never lost the Sabbath, and this supposition is accepted as conclusive proof. They think Saturday must therefore be the true Sabbath of the Bible. Well, at the Council of Nicaea in 325, they made a law that they would not be rendering their feast days according to the Jewish calendar, which was a lunar calendar. Also, Constantine made the same kind of ruling. He said it would be absurd if the Jews were able to boast that we couldn't celebrate our Passover or their Easter without the Jewish calendation rules. So they made a separation from the Jews. Also, his son Constantinus started persecuting the Jews, and it reached such a height that the computation of the calendar was forbidden under the pain of severe punishment. And this is from the Jewish Encyclopedia. So declaring the new month by observation on the lunar calendar was prohibited by the Romans. Finkelstein, he was on the front of the Time magazine cover, and he says the Jewish calendar was fixed in the 4th century. And then also Heinrich Graetz also says in his 6-volume work that even the computation of the calendar and trade in articles of religion were forbidden. They were all forbidden by the lunar calendar. So, okay, Doug Batchelor, here he is, president of Amazing Facts. Doug Batchelor states here in this video, no change in the calendar ever affects the weekly cycle. In the Bible, they measured time by the different kings. In the Bible, it says the 3rd year of that king, the 5th year of that king, and that's how they measured time. Then they started to measure time through AD and BC, the Julian calendar, and then later switched in 1582 to the Gregorian calendar. And that never changed the weekly cycle. The days of the Bible have gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Sabbath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Sabbath from the time of Adam. Moses had that reminded to him when the bread fell 6 days a week, going through the wilderness and not falling on the Sabbath. And if you look at any dictionary, encyclopedia, we have no question about what the first day is, the resurrection day. They call it Sunday, and the 7th day, Saturday. Here is an Amazing Facts article from Doug Batchelor and his team.
In Luke 23:54 to 24:1, we read of 3 consecutive days in order. This was written 30 years after Messiah's resurrection, so it shows that time had not been lost. We all know that Good Friday was the day that Yeshua was crucified and put in the grave. Verse 54 says, and this day was the preparation day, and the Sabbath drew on. In verse 56, it tells us that Yeshua rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment, and the next verse, Luke 24:1, mentions the first day of the week, the day he came out of the tomb.
Okay, well, our response is, well, there's no question about the 3 consecutive days at Calvary. He died on Passover, the 14th day of the lunar month, rested on the Sabbath, the first day of unleavened bread, Abib 15, and rose the following morning, Abib 16. Amazing Facts has given you information that demands a Good Friday crucifixion. Please ask them to show you this in Scripture. Good Friday is a Catholic invention. Rome did not observe the pagan 7-day planetary week in the 1st century. They did not adopt this calendar until the 4th century, 321 AD. And there was no Friday, Saturday, or Sunday recognized by Rome or Israel in the 1st century. Rome had an 8-day market week. Their days were lettered A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Here is a photo of the Julian 8-day week calendar. Amazing Facts gives you material that expects you to accept the Catholic calendar circa 1582 as the gold standard and the calendar of scriptures. This calendar is a historical document that is 1,500 years younger than the New Testament. Please ask Amazing Facts to show you in Scripture that the Gregorian calendar is the calendar of Scripture. And Seventh-day Adventists accept that Jesus, Yeshua, was killed in 31 AD. So if you overlay the 14th of Abib on the Gregorian calendar and extrapolate it back to year 31 AD, the full moon at Passover happened on what we would now call a Wednesday, not on a Friday. So this is a natural fact. Man cannot alter or mess with the lunar or solar calendars or cycles. They are untouchable, and they are naturally reoccurring as a mathematically definable event. We all agree that Yeshua was killed on Preparation Day, but Friday did not exist in Rome in the 1st century. And if you extrapolate the calendar of today back to that event, Passover did not occur on Friday, once again proving that the calendar today is a Catholic invention. It is not the calendar of the Old Testament, much less the New Testament.
Also, over 100 languages of the earth use the word Sabbath for Saturday. For example, the Spanish word for Saturday is Sábado, meaning Sabbath. What does this prove? It proves that when those 100 languages originated in the long, long ago, Saturday was recognized as the Sabbath day and was incorporated into the very name of the day.
Okay, well, I hope you'll go watch this video that we just recently did. Does Saturday in all languages disprove the lunar Sabbath? Well, here it is in 24 languages with the root word Sabbath is recognizable. And you will see the influence of the pagan astrological weekday's name is still seen today. You have the sun, the moon, Mars, Woden, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. So the fact is, both the Julian and the pagan planetary weeks have been accepted and used by Christians, and this reveals a profound amalgamation of Christianity with paganism. And Creation Week is an example of the names of the biblical week, first day, second day, third day, and we know the days of the week in Israel in Hebrew are still numbered, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Doug Batchelor states, 360 days in the Jewish lunar calendar. Well, I'll respond, an amazing fact is that all the ancient world had lunar calendars and 30-day months. Doug Batchelor stated much of the world had a month with 30-day months. Here he states that, because that's how long it takes the moon to go a complete cycle. Well, you can go and look in history for yourself, or you can read this book from Dale Wong, The 360-Day Year, that all ancient people of the world kept a calendar. It was a lunar calendar having 360 days in a year and 12 months of 30 days. Okay, here he is again saying it didn't work that way for the Jews. They were on a lunar calendar. Here he is again saying, the people say, Pastor, the calendar was changed, so we really don't know what day it is anymore. They never raise that question until they know the Sabbath truth. Has the Sabbath ever been changed before? Yes. Does the calendar change ever affect the days of the week? No. Has the weekly cycle been changed? No. Here's an example of the Julian calendar transferred to the Gregorian calendar. They added 10 days. Did they change the calendar? Yes. Was Thursday still followed by Friday? Any change you make to the calendar never affects the weekly cycle. When people raise this argument about the calendar that it has been changed and we don't know what the days of the week are, that's a total myth. Oh, I just want to remind you that Constantine changed the schedule of the weekly cycle. He put Saturday at the end of the week when it was day 1. And that is known by our Seventh-day Adventist Church as they published this article. Here we go again with Doug Batchelor. When people raise this argument about the calendar, that it has been changed and we don't know what the days of the week are, that's a total myth. We have the Naval Observatory, no change in the weekly cycle since long before the Christian era. Then there's the Jews. Have they all lost track of what their special sacred day is? They've been keeping it ever since before the Exodus. They know, as do other countries. So there's no question about what day the Sabbath is. Okay, now we're going to hear some things from Bible Answers Live. Is the true Sabbath calculated by the phases of the moon? And this is the radio station. You may have heard it. It's on all Christian radio stations all around the world. And Doug Batchelor is the main MC for this show. So here is a question that a caller called in.
Is the true Sabbath calculated by the phases of the moon? How can we be sure which day of the week it is? A friend of mine is telling me that he believes that we lost sight of the true Sabbath. I don't know if you ever heard of this before. He claims that these 7 days fall on the same days of the month, like the 15th to the 22nd, then the 29th, and that they are always following like the 3 months in a row that follow a new moon cycle. If you've ever heard of anything like this, I just find it hard to believe that Elohim would ever let us lose sight of his true day of worship.
So he says, yeah, that's a teaching that I think is very unbiblical. It's called the lunar Sabbath. They think that we are to pick the weekly Sabbath based upon the lunar cycles. But there's really nothing in the Bible that I find that teaches that. The Sabbath always was based on a numerical weekly cycle of 1 through 7, 1 through 7, 1 through 7, that is continued in continuity from Adam to the present day. Naval Observatory, the U.S. Naval Observatory in Greenwich, England, said there has never been a change to the calendar that's affected the continuity of the weekly cycle, and they say the weekly cycle has gone back in continuity since long before the Christian era. And the Jews, the Jews have been tracking it ever since Exodus. So to me, the reason I repeated all these is he repeats the same answers over and over. The letter that was sent into the Naval Observatory to follow the Jews, the 16 million Jews, and that the calendar has never been changed. And so here he goes again. Then when it goes all the way to Adam, because God creates the first Sabbath on the 7th day in Genesis chapter 2, and then it says, Abraham kept my laws and my commandments. So the Jews were keeping it, and they lost it in Egypt, or they started ignoring it. God got them back on track again when he started raining manna from heaven. God says you're going to get 6 days a week. You'll get enough for 1 day on Friday, gather enough for 2 days, because the next day is a Sabbath, and there won't be any on that day. So it got very clear for 40 years. It was reestablished what that cycle was, and it was 1 through 7, and it had nothing to do with the moon. Sorry. Oh, okay, again, here he is saying the Jews were on a lunar calendar. So, he contradicts himself quite a bit here. Okay, we did this video about the manna and the Sabbath, and I hope you'll go and watch it. It happens that they were on the second month. Specifically, nowhere else in the narrative of the Israelites wandering from Egypt to the Promised Land is an exact date mentioned like this one. And it was the second month. And so starting on the 16th day of the month, which this is all in Scripture, in Exodus 16, Yah provided food for the Israelites.
We can see here that Yahuwah was setting up his weekly Sabbath cycle for the Israelites. If the 15th and the 22nd were Sabbath days, then the 8th and the 29th of the month were also Sabbaths. So here we see a pattern, 8, 15, 22, and 29. What significance do these dates have? Just this. They correspond to the phases of the moon. Yahuwah was showing the Israelites that his Sabbath days were were to fall on the days corresponding to the moon's phases, thus showing that the weekly Sabbaths were to be kept by the same calendar or reckoning used to determine the annual Sabbath and feast days.
And we know there was no Roman Gregorian calendar back at the time of Israel. Okay, here's the rest of his answer to this question that was presented. Doug Batchelor continues, I've heard that before about the Sabbath being calculated by the moon phases. And I think you really have to torture your logic to say that the Sabbaths are governed by the moon. And then we know that Jesus, according to the Gospels, he kept the Sabbath as his custom was, and that was 2,000 years ago. And since then, we have a whole nation that has been at least aware of which day of the week is the Sabbath. Maybe the Jews haven't all kept the Sabbath, but they know which day is the Sabbath, and it's been kept ever since. Okay, and Doug Batchelor says, and this was one of his programs, the final war is over worship. He says Saturday is the Sabbath. I will ask this question. What will prevent God's end-time people from being deceived? Isaiah 8:20, to the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Acts 17:11, these were more noble than in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind. So the people of Berea studied to see whether these things were so. So as we conclude this presentation, I choose to put Yah's commandments before man-made laws, and I hope you will too. Share the truth, set someone free. And don't forget that Doug Batchelor does say the Jews were on a lunar calendar. So you can choose the lunar calendar or the Roman Gregorian calendar. And I hope you will go watch this video, The Great Cover-Up by the SDA Church. Our church studied this out. They studied this calendar out in 1938 and in 1995, both times finding that the lunar Sabbath was true, and both times covering it up and deciding not to tell the people. So I hope you'll go and watch more of this information on our website, LunarSabbathDay.com. And thank you for being here today.